Now, I'm sure that even those of us who are here know something about the need for children who need homes. There are children, well, adoption's a huge issue. And as Martha and Debbie share, there's thousands, even millions of children around the world that want parents to love them. Some children need rescue. Children that, youngsters that are too young to speak for themselves. They need rescue. There's a woman named Harriet Ward. She researched at-risk toddlers and infants. Some of her findings were very shocking. There are some horrifying examples of children left unprotected, and they were in dangerous and damaging environments. A baby whose parents forgot to feed the child. The child was so programmed to not worry or to be constantly hungry that the baby stopped crying when she was hungry. There was a 2-year-old they found that was left to forage for food just to sustain her out of trash buckets in the house. There was another 3-year-old who could accurately demonstrate how heroin is prepared. 3 years old. Not only the children need rescuing, young birth moms need rescuing. Some of them are too young or too inexperienced, or there's a multitude of reasons for young moms need to place their children in a home where someone's going to love them. One young gal wrote online, she said, "My son was adopted out to a lovely, open, adoptive family. I see him twice a month, and these were my reasons why I adopted my son out in the first place, to a home where people could love him. She said, I had no money. I wanted to finish high school. I wanted to live in a nice home. I did not want to raise my children in a horrible environment, even if it meant with me. I wanted my little boy to be happy and healthy, and he really deserved a very nice, warm home." And she said, "I was already in a bad state without taking my child with me." So there are about as many reasons that children need adopting as there are for people who want to adopt them. Both Deb and Marlene have one thing in common. They've adopted children. Deb is a longtime Cordovan. In her own right, Deb is well known around Cordova. And she is married to Rob Eckley, and together they fish. And this is Deb right here. Marlene Moffitt is a familiar face in Cordova. She's taught at the Cordova Elementary School for over 30 years. In fact, Marlene has taught in the same room that she attended kindergarten. That's a big deal in a culture where people move every couple of years, between 2 and 7 years. These two ladies, as I said, have two things in common. One, they've adopted children. And secondly, but no less important, they both operate from a strong basis of faith. As you listen, you'll see in each of their stories different places in their stories where faith and their lives intersect. And in the next hour or so, as I give you their stories, there'll be a few minutes after each one of them talk, if anyone has any questions. And both ladies will be giving lots of information. There's pens and there's paper on each table if you feel like you really want to take notes. And there's on the handouts are their stories that you can copy on each side, as well as information that you can take away with you to go online to find out more information, follow up. Or to get it copied and handed out to other people that you might know might be interested in placing, either finding a home for their child, or maybe finding being parents for a child. But either way,
know that she didn't mean it to sound like this, but of course, so many birth mothers that find a place are able to love, and that's why they make this choice. And so I know you didn't.
I also want to add, the woman that I quoted, and I think I skipped over that. The woman that I quoted actually had an open adoption, where I think I mentioned that she saw her son twice a year. And open adoptions and closed adoptions. But with an open adoption, as ladies will explain, you're able to interact with your child as your child grows up. And it's all one big happy.
That's such a good love decision, because who can do that? It's an incredible thing to do, is to let someone else raise your child. You're so right. Anyway, I've come to share my adoption story. It's a story I tell with great joy because of the fulfillment I feel I remember. For as long as I can remember, I've planned life as a wife and mother. But I didn't realize that my plan had some unexpected detours. I became a wife at 26, and after 6.5 years of marriage, my husband passed away from cancer. Between chemotherapy and medical treatments, we never had the opportunity to build a family. I was blessed because in our short years together, we had more than many people have in a long life together, but no children. A few years passed, and I still had a passion for developing a life. I met my husband Rob when we were married and enjoyed an adventuresome fishing and traveling lifestyle together. As the years passed, we became more intentional about having children, but with no success. We lived through the ups and downs of infertility and sought medical attention, but nothing worked. Each Mother's Day without children that came and went became more painful. I have a favorite Bible verse that says, I have come that you may have life and have it in abundance. I believe the Bible, and I felt that abundant life, in our case, included children. I painfully let go of the idea of being pregnant and found that my ultimate dream was really to parent. And adoption was the way to get there. Rob was all in. I found that it wasn't uncommon for the woman in the relationship to be the driving force in the pursuit of adoption as it was for me. Rob helped and supported the effort, knowing that I was made to be a mother, so he would actively involved. After exploring the options available, we decided that domestic infant adoption was for us. It could be quite a wait, but probably not the 7 years that I had figured when I first heard what I heard, all the stories I'd heard. Oh no, it would be so long, 7 years, but it wasn't, and it doesn't need to be. We followed a recommendation for an agency from a friend who had adopted, and we learned that agencies don't all have the same methods. There were things about their system that we didn't feel comfortable with, such as their method of locating birth mothers, and the time allowed to finalize a relinquishment decision, which that part of it is governed by state law. So you can go to different states if you aren't comfortable with the law in the state you're shopping. We shopped some more and found a good fit for us. After an extensive application process, which is daunting, but no more daunting than infertility, we were officially pregnant. And we were told to go home, prepare our nursery and our lives to be chosen by a birth mother for a child. We waited and waited, and a year went by with a couple of failed attempts, and an opportunity presented itself to us outside of the agency for a possible placement of a 3-year-old boy. I was so clearly desiring a newborn infant that it was a stretch and hard for me to go there. But I didn't want to ignore that, and I felt, though, that if we couldn't have a baby the conventional way, that we could at least have what we wanted. I was kind of in a little bit, I want what I want. But we thought about it and finally decided to open our hearts to this toddler, who probably came with emotional baggage, because there were some problems in the family. And I started to get excited about it. Something started working in me, but once I made that decision, it was okay and it was good. child in an adopted family. Marlene came to me one day before even Catherine came, and she said, I have this need to share. And I went, I have the need to share too. And her side of sharing is totally different than my side of sharing. My side is to go to birth mothers and share what it's like when you place a baby in a family, how that family grows and becomes. There's no greater gift than she can choose, is to choose life, to choose a family that's ready for a child, and to give a child a chance at life that she isn't able to provide. Surely she's able to provide the love. I mean, that's not a question almost any of the time, but to be able to provide the life that she can't provide through circumstances like you spoke. It's easy to get lost in the pain of an unwanted pregnancy, but to look beyond that can take you to a site far from that pain, into an unparalleled joy experience in an adopted family. Birth mothers can choose a family for their child. They can meet them, interview them, choose the degree of openness of adoption. They can get counseling and financial help. They can get access to medical help they might not otherwise have available to them. It's a very real and loving adoption for those in an unwanted pregnancy. Though there may not be any local adoption agencies, as there aren't here in Cordova, there are agencies that will work with birth mothers through the local services or by remote contact. We travel to get our children, rather than travel to get hers. It's not a common nor is it a hardship. When we traveled to Washington, we had the opportunity to meet birth mother, birth father, and the birth mother and the birth father of both of our kids. And actually one birth grandma and a birth brother. So we made an agreement with them to send letters and pictures on a regular basis. None of the birth parents, however, know our last name or where we live, so there's security for us against unplanned contact. And that's by the adoption agency counsel us in that, and that can change if birth parents want to. They can contact us and say, we want to have more contact, and through the agency, and we can discuss it. So we do all of our communications through that agency. At one point, Eli's birth mother contacted the agency when Eli was about 6 and wanted to receive information that we've been sending. And Bethany Christian Services, which is the name of the adoption agency that we use, kept all communications that we'd sent up till then on file. And so this birth mother was given a whole file of letters and pictures that she could catch up on progress. And it was really easy. She was ready for it though. For a while, she needed to heal from the loss, and then she was ready, and she wasn't ready to emotionally face all of that, but it was waiting for her. She can contact us at any time through the agency if she or the birth father wants to, and they can request from us more contact, or we can work out between us what will work best for them and kids. In the Cordova High School curriculum, we have a baby think it over program, and I'm sure most of you guys know about that, where the students have the experience of caring for a computerized baby. They carry it around. You can see kids carrying them around town. Most of you have seen that. They care for them 24/7 for about 3 days. They get a taste of the reality of caring for an infant. And I think the adoption option education would be a great complement to that program. I have more specific information that I could share if anybody wants it, and would help anyone interested to get started. If you want an email, I'm open to information. Anybody wants it. I've listed websites on the handout, and on some of those websites, there's common questions that birth mothers may have when considering adoption plans for their kids. And on this, I have one printout here. Some of them are: can I be involved in choosing the family of my baby? How much contact can I have with the family after the birth? Or can I choose not to stay in touch? How will I know if my baby is with a good family? What about medical bills while I'm pregnant? What if I need housing while I'm pregnant? If I choose adoption, when is my decision final? What will my child be told about me If I do make an adoption plan, will the sad feelings ever go away? There's lots of information out there for those to search those kinds of things. So, if anybody has any questions, that's what I have. Now's the time. Or if they're not, after I present the report. Anybody have anything?
Deb, would you recommend, can you give reasons why someone might want to go through an agency rather than just go ahead and make arrangements with the birth mom, or?
Well, this agency that we work with had a good degree of counseling available for birth parents and for adoptive parents. So we went into it not knowing a whole bunch about it, and they were able to educate us on, for instance, this thing I talked about, contact us. If you, at first, don't want to have your last name or the city that you live in out there for some distressed birth mother who's made their decision final and has to come and find us or something like that, they counseled us not to do that, and they said, you can always give more information as time passes. So, great counseling, great, they were all hooked up with all the legal services that were needed for the adoption finalization, and they just had birth mothers coming to them. The agency that I mentioned, Bethany, they do international adoptions, they do adoptions through the state, they do, and actually they're all across the country. They do domestic infant adoptions. They have a whole range of styles that they do. So I think it's great because we feel a security in all of the way they do the whole
They know what
process.
they're doing, and you feel that it's a very
Very
emotional
much so.
decision.
And they are ongoing. I mean, I still have a way to get in contact with them and perhaps find a birth mother. They might not always know where a birth mother is, but they know where they exist. So I still in touch with them.
When you adopted your kids through the agency, did the agency get background information for you from like their parents regarding maybe health or medical issues that could
Yep.
be passed down generationally?
Absolutely. I have a whole checklist of things that they ask for. They didn't just say, give us information. They have specific information that they ask for. Like when you sign up at the doctor's, have you ever had, I don't know, sure, has your father, has your grandparents, but we have that's helpful. It's not always available all the time, but through an agency, it's good. Even if you're not through an agency, you could do that, but it's just all, they have legal.
Right, Marlene, you want to do this? Thank you, Deb.
Sure.
Move my little stand a little bit.
Oh, it doesn't matter. I can fit you in.
I'm sure your personal life.
In fact, I get better, less glare.
For those of you that don't know me, my name is Marlene Moffett, and my adoption story is very different from Deb's. I'm single. I never wanted to be a mom. I've been teaching about 15 years, and I felt like I got my fill of kids at school, and I didn't need any more. But then that mid-30s time comes, and I started feeling pretty lonely. And I kept thinking that Prince Charming might show up, and he never did. About that same time, I started just getting bombarded by adoption. Every TV program I looked at, every magazine article I read, kept talking about children who needed homes. And I kept ignoring that little voice inside of me that said, this is what you're supposed to do. And then one Mother's Day, I found myself just sobbing at church. And I decided maybe it was something I really wanted. About that same time, I was gone on a summer trip. And after praying one day, I wrote down these words: go home, get rid of the computer, buy a bed, someone's coming to live with you. And I thought, this is an aside. I don't want him in the twin bed in the other room. So didn't have an idea what was going on. summer of 1997, I found myself having a spur-of-the-moment lunch with a friend, and she had a picture of a little Chinese girl on her doorpost. And she told me that she was in the process of adopting a child from China. And I finally said the words that had been in my heart for about a year. I said, I think I'm supposed to adopt a daughter from China. The following day, she brought me some information about Chinese adoption, and I took the first steps. The process of international adoption can at times be quite overwhelming, but I just took one step at a time, and I went into it with the attitude that God would either help me with each of the steps or he'd close the door. All the paperwork was completed in about 8 months, and my dossier went to China in January of 1998. Once that was completed, I started on all the preparations of my home. I came into nursery, I got the crib, I started buying all those cute little girl clothes, and I waited. And one night, shortly after I painted the nursery, I woke up, sitting straight up in my bed, and I said, it can't be a boy, the nursery is pink. And I thought, well, that's weird, and I went back to sleep. And then in September of 1998, I got the call that my daughter was waiting for me. I was excited. I got a grainy little picture, her name, and her age of 12 months, but no other information. And then a week later, I got a call from the agency saying that there was additional information on the child, and I knew before they even told me that there had been a mix-up on penmanship, and in fact, the child was a boy. And I said, well, then he's not my daughter. And I turned down that referral, which was a little scary because I didn't know then where my paperwork would end up, or in the pile. But within about 2 weeks, I got a second call telling me that I got a referral of a 6.5-month-old baby. Katie Wren was waiting. Chinese adoption requires that you travel to China to finalize the adoption. So I left about a month later, and I brought Katie home in October of 1998. And as an aside, the day she came home, Michelle Fisher and I almost had to call the fire department because I did not know how to open the car seat. That's how experienced I was with me. The following fall, I felt a real urgent need to start the process to bring home a second daughter. At that time, the paperwork was completed a little bit faster, but the wait was much longer. Josie's referral came in June of 2001, and she came home at the age of 14 months in August of that year, just a few weeks before 9/11. The challenges have been many, but when both my daughters were finally home and we were settled into our family, I discovered that I was really finally enrolling truly about how to be a mom. I think my adoption story is one of taking one step at a time and trusting that what is supposed to happen will happen. But if I hadn't come home, and if I hadn't gotten rid of that computer and bought a bed and discovered that I did like to have a child in my home, I don't know that all those dots would have been completed. Thankfully, I stepped out on the path at just the right time. And I'm blessed to have 2 beautiful daughters, who Josie turns 12 today, and Katie is 14. Because I'm an educator, I have to educate. So I put on my teacher hat now. There are tens of millions of children around the world that need a forever family. There are 5.5 million children in Africa. are some truths about 4 common myths of adoption. Number 1, adoption costs too much. The reality is, depending on the circumstances, adoption can cost nothing to $30,000. There is assistance. There's an adoption tax credit. It will expire in December of 2012. Right now, the tax credit is for $10,000. There's another one in the works for up to $13,000. There are grants from various foundations and organizations to families pursuing adoption, usually for between $1,000 and $2,000. There's reduction of fees for any child that has a special need, and so many of those special needs are so minor or already correct. Myth number 2, isn't there a great chance that a child's birth parents will get the child back after adoption? The reality is, in modern adoption, laws have been established that nearly eliminate the possibility, kind of like Dennis talked about. It's practically unheard of in an international adoption, and in domestic adoption and adopting out of foster care, this possibility can be avoided by obtaining competent legal service. And an agency is the perfect way to go. Myth number 3. Adopted children probably have many emotional issues that I won't know how to handle. The reality is, some children will have traumatic experiences that may increase the chance of having emotional and behavioral issues. But the truth is that any child, adopted or biological, may present these types of challenges. Number 4, I may not be able to love an adopted child as I would a biological child. Hogwash. While many people fear this very thing, it's difficult to find a parent who actually struggles with this issue after they've adopted. According to research, 95% of adopted parents say that they've experienced a strong attachment to their child. And in addition, the same study concludes that adopted adolescents are deeply attached to their adopted parents as much as their non-adopted siblings. There are 3 basic types of adoption. The first is U.S. foster care. As I said before, there's an estimated 500,000 children in foster care, and among those 500,000, approximately 125,000 to 135,000 of these are considered available for adoption. These children vary in age and have been placed in the system for a number of reasons, including neglect, abuse, and abandonment. The fact is that many of these children have endured tremendous pain and need someone to love them. The adoption of children from the U.S. foster care system would take place through a state's human resource department or in many states, private agencies. The advantages of U.S. foster care adoption is the cost is free or almost free. Many of these children also qualify for monthly subsidy and Medicaid that may continue until they're 18 years of age. And there's little or no chance of a custody issue after placement. Cautions, there's limited availability of units. And there's a higher incidence of long-term emotional and medical issues. And sometimes these issues are unknown at placement. Other considerations for foster care adoption, post-adoptive help and counseling may be limited interstate, especially in the state of Alaska. International adoption is the second kind. That's what I did. These adoptions involve children in foreign countries who live in an orphanage or in some case foster care. Katie was in an orphanage, Josie was in foster care. International adoption is generally done through an agency with expertise in just a few particular countries. It's governed both by U.S. law and the law of the child's given birth country. The laws on international adoption vary widely from country to country and can often change. It is therefore especially important to work with an experienced agency with a track record of successful adoption in that country. Advantages, there's little or no chance of custody issues after placement, and the timeline is fairly set for each country. Cautions, Adoption through an agency is regulated and supervised process in which the agency takes care of most of the details. The advantage, pre-adoptive and post-adoptive services are usually provided both for the birth parents and the adoptive parents, and there's a greater chance of adopting a newborn. Cautions, there are unpredictable and often extended waiting periods, and the potential of a last-minute change of mind by the birth parent can happen. High costs due to agency fees and other medical bills for the birth child, for the birth of the child. Excuse me. Then another consideration, as Catherine talked a little bit, is to decide if it will be open or closed adoption. There are 8 steps to adoption. Number 1, you have to arrive at some decision about adoption. You research, you investigate, you get facts about adoption. The internet has changed the research aspect tremendously in the past decade. I got my first computer internet accessible the month that my Josie went to China, so I think of the change in just that amount of time. You need to make your adoption plan based on careful collection of reliable information and not just basically based on emotional experience. You need to evaluate the agencies. If you're the spread cut sheet kind of person, get your spreadsheet out, go on the internet, do your research, fill out the blanks, and it will become pretty obvious what agency will fit. Ask friends and acquaintances about agencies that they've used. Once you've selected an agency, they will help you select a social worker who in turn will help you through each of the steps of adoption. The third one is you need to investigate funding. As I said before, the federal adoption tax credit gives families an income tax credit for their adoption expenses up to $10,000, which hopefully by next year it will become $13,000. On the handout, there's a place that you can go, and it's a quick little letter to Baby Murkowski and Young to say, please support this. Adoption from state foster care. In many states, couples who adopt children from state foster care system will pay little to nothing. If the child has special needs, you can receive a monthly stipend as well as Medicaid for the child. Some corporations, which we don't usually deal with in court, but some corporations will also help you find an adoption. And if you are a military family, the U.S. military will reimburse active duty personnel up to $2,000 in adoption expenses after the adoption is finalized. There are a number of foundations that have been established to help fund adoption expenses. Many churches committed to orphan ministry have started developing grant programs for members needing help. Special needs adoptions. Many agencies offer significant reduction in fees for children with special needs. And again, it can be as mild as a cleft lip that's already been repaired. That you actually bring a child home and there's very little special need other than speech therapy. The fourth step for adoption is you have to submit your paperwork. So your social worker will give you a list of the documents you need: birth certificate, employment confirmation, doctor's reports, letters from personal references. You'll also receive a list of the paperwork that must be completed and submitted. And a good agency will help you with every one of those steps. You may have heard that from others that the paperwork is endless, and it is, but it does eventually end. If you are a couple, it's best to decide which one of the spouses are gifted study does, it educates you about adoption. It meets the state's requirements, and it also reports honestly to the court about the safetiness and the preparedness of you and your family to bring a child into it. It includes questions about finances, employment history, marriage, parenting style, leisure activities, and your expectations of adoption. Usually that process can be done in a couple of months. Sometimes it takes longer depending on the social worker's load and also how good you are at completing paperwork. The sixth step would be to determine which child you will adopt. If you're adopting out of U.S. foster care, there are actually lists of children that you can go in and look at pictures. If you are an international adopter, usually the country has some way of selecting a child and then you are given a referral. In domestic adoption, you'll be asked by your agency to develop a family profile, and Deb brought hers, it's here that you can look at. That's usually contained in a scrapbook. It will include a letter of introduction that tells the birth parents about your family, and you'll include pictures that will help them to get to know you. Seventh step is to actually welcome the child home. And there are practical things to do before you bring the child home. Contact your insurance, contact your doctor, prepare the rooms, prepare other siblings. And you need to be prepared for a transition period when that child comes home. Even in the best situations, it can be very exhausting and difficult when that new family member is grieving for what they've had. That even though you think, what you're bringing them into is so much better than where they may have been, they're still losing everything involved. Just an aside with Katie, it was very easy. She came home at 6.5 months and was so delayed. She was about like a 3-month-old baby, so there was no great transition. With Josie, she had been in foster care. I took her away from a foster mother, father, grandmother, and there was a great deal of grief that had to go on. Then the last step is to finalize the adoption, and once you come home, or once the baby comes home, there's usually about a 6-month period before all of the court paperwork is completed and the adoption is finalized. In international adoption, the adoption is finalized in that country, but when you come home, you re-adopt in order to get a U.S. birth certificate and some of those things that make it easier for them throughout their whole life. When I look at this crowd, you are a perfect example of not everybody is called to adopt. But I believe everybody is called to have children. So there are ways to help, even if you're not one that's supposed to bring a child into your home. Number one, sponsor a child. Find an organization that you feel comfortable with that's doing good work in orphanages or helping children in foster care, and sponsor a child. It may cost anywhere from like $25 to $50 a month. My older daughter had a writing assignment for language arts just a couple months ago, when she was bemoaning that she had to come up with a charity. And she's 14. And I said, if I could find, once I retire, if I could do what I really want to do, I would start a foundation that would help people adopt, get grants out there. And I was there. And I said, if you could convince 1,000 people in the city of Cordova to give up a $5 cup of coffee a month, how much could you raise? So we got the calculator and we put it down, and you could raise $60,000. So it doesn't take very much. become a foster parent in most states, there's a required 30 hours of training, a home study done, and ongoing training to keep your home open. Foster parents are needed for children of all ages from infants to teens. Another way to help is to become a respite provider. I'm not exactly positive in Alaska, but in most states, children who are in foster care can only be cared for by a state-approved respite caregiver. You can't hire the teenager down the block to come and watch you if you're a foster. So, become a respite care provider. If you're not ready for the commitment it takes to be a full-time foster parent, then maybe providing a date night babysitting or relief babysitting while a foster mom needs to get to a medical appointment or out on a date with her husband. Maybe that's the way you can help a child. Another way is to advocate for waiting child. With Facebook, you can go on some of these waiting children lists, find a child that speaks to you, and then get that kid's picture on it. Post it on Facebook every day, because you don't know where that information is going to go. I have a friend right now who advocated for a child for about a year and a half and then decided, she is really supposed to come home. And she just got her letter of acceptance from China 2 days ago. So you may advocate for a child and you may find out actually that child's supposed to be in your own house. Then another way is to give financially to help offset the financial burden of adoption. I got amazed when people can't pay money. When you walk into adoption and you go, $20,000 as a single school teacher, how am I going to do this? And I got amazing people just hand me money. And after I came home, I've had amazing people just hand me money or offer me certain services that I couldn't do by myself, but just to come up next to an adopted family and help support them. Even at the beginning, it may be just something like, I'll go to the grocery store for you, because you can't get out of the house right now. So there are just a lot of ways that you can give financially if you don't know who needs the money. If there's not a person in Cordova that you see. Right now, I just heard of another family adopting it. It just does my heart good. But if you don't know, then find one of those foundations. Like I was telling Katie, you don't know the family in Georgia that needs the money, but if you go to this foundation, they will get your money enough for something. Before I close, Catherine suggested I tell you about 2 women I know who have Chinese daughters. The Chinese families with children from China have this incredible network that just, you meet families from all over the world. And I've had the pleasure of personally being a friend with one of these and an internet friend with another. Mary lives in Oregon. She's 60 years old. In 2000, she adopted Emma at the age of 4 1/2. She and her husband, Pat, had 2 biological children in their 20s. They decided to adopt, and just as her paperwork was going in China, Pat died of cancer. And Mary said, I still need to go get my child. So she went and adopted Emma at 4 1/2. And since that time, she then brought home Mia at the age of 6. And she brought home Claire at the age of 11 from China. And sometimes struggles to get by. But just felt, we need to do this. And the other person So I guess what I want to say is we all need to do something. And you just have to figure out what your little piece is in the puzzle, you know? And if adoption is stirring in your heart and it's something you're considering, Deb and I would gladly, I mean, things have changed in the last 12 years, but we will gladly help you with any step we can help you in. And if adoption, if you're not supposed to bring that child home, then, you know, consider what it is you're supposed to do with that child in this world. So, any questions, I'd be glad to answer, or if you have a pen, my email is mkmoffett, MOFFITT@gci.net. And I love to talk, especially to single women who have that pull, but gladly we'll talk to anyone. But if you know any single mom that's thinking we can't do it.
And I'll give you my email address too, if anybody wants to talk about the way that we do it. It's Eckley, E-C-K-L-E-Y. E-C-K-L-E-Y @gci.net. Well,
What is the cultural thing about girls in China? What?
About Cordova and China?
No, girls in China, girls.
Oh, for the past almost 30 years, the Chinese government has had a one-child policy. And socially, boys are favored because when you go to get old, you live with your son, you don't live with your daughter. It's getting better. But that's why there are so many girls in China that need it. It's less, it is getting better, where people are keeping girls. But, yeah, when you can only have one child.
How is all Asian countries, how are they for multiple births? Isn't that kind of a, it's not, it's sort of.
In China, if you have twins, you are considered doubly blessed, and if you have twins, you can keep both children. If it's your first child.
I know in all countries it isn't that way. It's something's wrong with you. It's,
Right,
You know, like.
yeah. In
That's
China,
just-
it's
yeah.
considered a blessing to have twins.
They're Christians, and triplets. Anyway, look down.
Thank you, Chris, for asking those questions. If you have any more questions or know anybody that does, both ladies have made themselves available. And feel free to call on that. I want to say that some children are not given up to be loved. They have parents that have given them both life and love, and it's an act of sacrificial love, giving them or placing them with a family that can give them lifelong care. But in some instances, the parents can only give life. And there are children like a child in an orphanage. Another woman I know, her husband, during a time of separation, impregnated another woman he got involved with, and the couple got back together again, and the woman went to that woman and said, I will raise your child. Just to keep that child from being a casualty of a separation situation. Now, there's a lot of reasons people adopt, but children need homes. And in our situation, the way we help, we babysit. We kind of adopted a grandchild there locally to take care of a couple days a week, and we sponsored a child in India. That's what we could do. That's what we're prepared to do. There might be other plans in the offing. Who knows what comes up, but we'll see. But that's what we're doing for the moment. Okay, did you see woven into these stories, both women to some degree felt led, but there was a spiritual component of their series of decisions. For instance, in Deb's story, she got she was ready to accept that a higher power was at work, a higher power than she, with a bigger plan. She knew that something was bigger here, and she stepped back and she said, okay, whatever. And then everything fell together. Then there's Marlene, and right from the start, she had marching orders. Step 1, step 2, step 3. It was real obvious. And she felt led to the children that eventually became her responsibility. Both ladies gave flip sides of the same, different perspectives of the same issue of adoption. That was real huge when this all came together. It just kind of fell together. It was very interesting. There's a verse in the Bible that says God places the lonely in families. Now, both ladies seem to reflect that this truth exists. That these children were lonely. They need people to love them, and guess what? Here we are. And most of you probably know of adoptive families that are intact and quite healthy. What most people don't realize, and what I didn't even realize, is that Jesus was adopted. I always thought of Joseph as Jesus' stepdad. He claimed to be the child of the universal God, right? Okay, the living God. And I believe that he was, and a lot of people do. Though Jesus was God's son, his father couldn't be here. God did not have a physical body. Yet he had a half-human son that was born. So someone had to raise him. So God, in essence, in effect, became a parent that adopted out his son to Joseph to raise him. I mean, if you think about that, it's huge. I mean, God, universal God being an adopted father, he was big enough to do that, to give up his son. In fact, the Bible teaches that God was not only a person who adopted out his son, but he also was a person who adopted, who was willing to adopt children in his own right. Now, let me explain this. He sent Jesus so that the world could be adopted back to its original condition. Now, I don't know how many of you know that, but I'm just going to spend a few minutes. I want to kind of elaborate on something. Because not everybody thinks of God as a person. Today we kind of efface God and we kind of guess at who he is, but the Bible is kind of specific on some things. For instance, did you know that the Old Testament was a huge science experiment? Now, science experiments have two things. They have a hypothesis and a control group that proves that hypothesis. Okay? Since God, universal God, our higher power, is invisible, he had to somehow show us over time who he was. So what he did was he picked the people as a control group, the Hebrews, to show us through the whole first part of the Bible, the first part of the Old Testament, that he is powerful, that he is a good God. He showed, if you ever read the Old Testament, you can see through his interactions with people that he's a good God. He only wants good for people in general. He answers prayer, he shows all that. And so the Jews kind of interacted. You probably see the Ten Commandments, right? Moses leading them through the desert, lots of miracles happening that God showed us today through the stories in the Old Testament that he's real. Now, one of the other things that's important to realize is this, that in the Old Testament, there was something, it's like a blight or a death curse on the whole universe. That's why we have death. People say, why is there death? Why is there illness? some people believe that all people are children of God. And that used to be the case. Now, if you believe in like creation, right? And some people do and some people don't. Adam and Eve were hooked up through like this umbilical cord to God. It was like this umbilical cord that gave people light, their intellectual light. They understood things that we don't today. It gave them, most of all, people were not meant to die. People were never meant to die. That's not what God planned in the day. So actually everybody was children of God. But when we turned away from God, it was kind of like we turned our back. We said, okay, God, we want to figure out our own way of doing things. We want to separate from you. And that's exactly what we did. And so today, a lot of people are searching for truth. They're searching for light. They're looking for answers. Why is there death? Why is there sickness? Why is there evil in the world? But most of all, how do we get to God and who He is? So, the sacrifices were shown that they had some effect of getting close to God through the Old Testament. We found out that we needed something to bring us close to God. God sent His Son to restore the human race into connection of how it originally was. When people believe in Jesus and His final